The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
It's better than indoor plumbing. It's better than electricity. It's better than the thermos bottle. That's right. It's the 2017 Matt Talk Online Digital Fan Guide Division I preview, simply calling it The Guide. Over 200 pages digitally delivered to you March 14th. Pre-sale, pre-orders available now. MattTalkOnline.com/FanGuide17. Listening to this show, you will get $5 off if you use the offer code PODCAST. That's PODCAST. Offer code when you buy it at MattTalkOnline.com/FanGuide17. Over 200 pages of facts, stats, history. Every single wrestler competing in St. Louis, every single score all season long. History, 4-time All-Americans, 3-time national champions. Who's got the most All-Americans all time? Which coach has the most titles? How do they rank top 10? Everything in this guide, digitally delivered, optimized for your tablet and iPad, but it works just fine on your computer. And if you feel like going to Kinko's, you can print it out. It's going to be a lot of paper. But anyway, retailing at $19.99. You listen to this show, and any show on the Matt Talk Podcast Network with regularity, use the promo code, I'm going to say it really lightly now, podcast. Yep, use podcast. That way I know you're listening. You'll save $5. It is worth it. ESPN loves it. You've heard my sound bites on other shows about how much Adam Amin used this thing when he was with ESPN. I'm going to stop belaboring the point right now, and we'll get to our show. But MattTalkOnline.com/FanGuide17, the guide. This thing, the most unbelievable Division I preview guide ever assembled, and it just keeps getting better every year. You'll want it for your fantasy contests. You'll want it for your knowledge bombs. You'll want it sitting there in the arena going, okay, hey, who's this guy? Boom, there he goes. Also got tweet your direct social media stuff right to it. It's an interactive guide. You'll be able to pop up a podcast that's related to who's going on and what's going on. You'll want to get this. MattTalkOnline.com/FanGuide17, promo code podcast. Save yourself $5. You will not regret it.
You've always got time for short time.
Hey, it's Mario Lopez.
David Taylor.
Brent Metcalf. Johnny Hendricks. Tony Ramos. Bubba J.
Mike Golick.
Matthew Modine. The one and only Chael Sonnen. And you are listening to the one and only Short Time Wrestling Podcast by the often imitated and never duplicated Jason Bryant.
Back again on the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. It's only fitting 4 national titles for King University in the Women's Collegiate Wrestling Association. And that means 4 times Julia Salata comes on the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. Julia, welcome back.
What's up, JB?
Just for proper introductions, Julia is an assistant coach at King University, which recently won its 4th WCWA National Championship in a row. That's 4 in the first 14 years. Granted, King's only been around for about, 8 of those, 9 of those. My timeline's incorrect or may not be completely accurate. But Julia, congrats on the team championship and your vertical leap as a result.
Thank you. I don't really know where that came from. Someone happened to catch it on Snapchat, and I didn't even remember doing it until I saw the picture afterwards. So pretty stoked about that.
And what Julia's referring to is her giant standing broad jump after one of her wrestlers wins a national championship. And I mean, you got some serious. I mean, you were like almost above Mormon's head there.
Yeah, I did play high school volleyball, so there was a lot of work, working on my vertical and stuff. But that doesn't really come into play in the wrestling a whole lot. But I guess I still have it.
So we've never brought up the volleyball discussion. Outside hitter, middle hitter. I mean, you're not super tall.
Yeah, I was an outside hitter.
I figured you'd have to be outside because those middle hitters are like the 6'2", 6'3" women.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a little bit vertically challenged, but like I said, I got the hops, so it worked out a little bit.
I like to think my hops were pretty good too back in the day. I did play some volleyball in the summertime, but let's not pretend I was not doing any outside hitting. I was doing a lot of the blocking in the middle, but at 5 foot, 8 at the time, I'm not doing a whole lot on the outside hitting. But Julia's on the show to talk about women's college wrestling, to talk about the WCWA championship. But there's some things that we need to discuss that we have not had the opportunity to talk about on this show since, the month of August in Rio de Janeiro that involved a couple things that are notable. The best steak sandwiches ever, the biggest margarita on the planet, and photobombing Ryan Seacrest. So let's just go back and let's get your side of the stories. First of all, you were down there as a training partner with Adeline Gray. So you were kind of away from the rest of the world. And then the few times you get out to Copacabana, things and fun were occurring.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We were kind of tucked away at Lanier. It was one of the U.S. high performance centers about 3-4 miles west of the Olympic Park. So we were kind of secluded, but we made the trek down to Copacabana a couple nights a week just to kind of get out, release some stress, whatever it was. And we made the most of our time there. Like you said, the steak sandwiches were out of this world. That was a complete accident that we even discovered those. Getting to go hang out with Ryan Seacrest and stuff and ending up on his Snapchat and Instagram story. I still don't know how we pulled that off, but it was a fun time.
This is going to sound similar to the story we've told about Uzbekistan, because Julie and I have the shared agreement that we had the most possible fun that you can have in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. And I think we did the same thing. I mean, granted, I'm sure there was a lot more things we could have gotten into that involved maybe fun, maybe not the type of stuff Ryan Lochte was getting into, but let's just say beach volleyball's okay, here's the thing. We go down to try to get into beach volleyball. And Clarissa Chun was like just the ticket magnet. She could get into anywhere. Because Clarissa has like that type of voodoo. So the one night I'm down there with you guys, we couldn't get in. We're like, all right, well, let's just hop to bar, have some fun down at Copacabana Beach. Ends up it's earlier that night I'd run into Dan Valamont, who was staying at some favela, which was another story entirely. So it's you, Becca Leathers. let's just recap it from your side. You Ubered or cabbed it from Lanier, which is like an hour away, which is like it's 18 miles, but it was like an hour away.
It was a solid hour and a half Uber ride. Like you said, as the crow flies, it's not that far, but traffic was just insane all the time. So we kind of got used to it. You just kind of grin and bear it and, made our way down there.
Yeah, so we get down there. We're like, all right, let's just find this spot. Let's stop in. Ends up, so it's me, you, Becca. Who else is with us? It was just us three at the time?
That was with us then, yeah.
Okay, it was just that then we was like, all right, we'll get a steak sandwich. Like as an app, I think they had the cheap, I don't even know what the cheap beer was. And it's like, as soon as the first bite,
you got a Frosty mug.
Yes, I did get the Frosty mug because that was key. I wanted something ice cold. I don't even know if it was the Brazilian Natty Light or something like that. But ends up taking a bite of this. We get two steak sandwiches as an app to split between the three of us. As soon as I take the first bite, I'm like, oh, we're getting more of those, and it was just the most delicious thing ever.
Yeah, top 5. I'm going to say 5. It might have been, like, in terms of just the simplicity of it, that might have been the best steak sandwich I've ever had in my life. I mean, it was like heaven in your mouth. It was perfection.
So then the night gets better. We go down. We end up looking at NBC and where they're going. And then we run into Mike Kwame, who wrestled at North Dakota State. He's a Minnesota guy. Elena Pirishkova's brother was there. Then it ended up being just a group of people. And we're like, all right, well, Seacrest is coming on. Let's go to that Tex-Mex bar, which makes so much sense in Brazil that there's Tex-Mex. And this is, yeah. So, and then I will not throw any names under the bus about who got the very large beerita. It's like a margarita had like a Dos Equis jammed into it or something. It was like, let's just say we ended up toting this thing over to Ryan Seacrest's perch in like a nacho tin. I don't know. It was just, put it this way. At this time, it's like 2:30 in the morning because we're waiting for Ryan Seacrest to come back. Why we're waiting for Ryan Seacrest, we didn't know. Then we run into these judo fans who Ken Berger and I had met earlier in the week. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're all on TV. And mind you, I'm wearing jorts that I bought from the store down the street because my luggage hadn't arrived yet.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for you to tell some of the story here because right now I feel like I'm dominating the conversation.
No. Yeah. So there's that big drink. We dumped it. Because we had gotten like chips and salsa or something. They put it in that like tin. It was like a sand pail. Almost.
We ordered nachos. And the chips came in a tin. So anyway.
So we dumped out the crumbs, dumped the drink in there, put a straw in it, and walked over to the NBC studio on the beach. And then we came out, and they were talking to the crowd, right? And they're like, "Oh, Ryan Seacrest is going to come out. Make sure you go crazy." And they were handing out flags, like, "Here's an American flag. Here's a Canadian flag, whatever." And you said, "You're like, if we can read the teleprompter, you'll be on TV." So we kind of lined ourselves up behind the teleprompter, and they start filming it. And now you can tell your Robot Chicken story because that's how it set this whole thing up.
Yeah. So those of you familiar with the show on Cartoon Network called Robot Chicken, Seth Green, who is that weird redheaded dude that was in, I don't know, every like 90s teen comedy, Airborne was one of my most, that movie's probably older than you. But anyway, we're sitting there and then I yell like, your work on Robot Chicken was so underrated. And he turned around, looks right at me. And I've blogged about this. You can go back and read this on Matt Talk Online. I've still got the blog up in the blog section. But he goes, that's funny. I got to get you on my Snapchat or Instagram. I can't remember what it was. And then he sets it up again. And I throw another Robot Chicken line out. He's like, all right, it's on there. And then NBC Olympics comes over and gets us all cheering. It's like the fact that he acknowledged the Robot Chicken thing. I think, he's, oh, Seacrest, you're great. Okay. Yeah. Robot Chicken. What? Wait a minute. Somebody actually watched that?
Like obscure reference. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm all about obscure 80s and 90s references. So that was cool. And then just so much about photobombing Ryan Seacrest the entire night, because as soon as that happened, your Twitter and text messages, which you never check, were blowing up. Mine were blowing. Like everybody around us, like there's Kwame, there's Becca, there's Julie, there's JB. It's like it was like the only night this would have ever happened. It happened. So again, we find a way to have the most possible fun with basically little money being spent, and we get on national television for it.
Yeah, and I was on his because they took a video when they were playing that Biz Markie song. And me and Ryan Seacrest were singing, and I was taking a selfie with him. And that video ended up going on his Instagram, and it's still up there. So I'm on Ryan Seacrest's Instagram. I'm pretty famous.
The thing is, do you even know who Biz Markie is?
Just for that one song. That's the only way.
You didn't even look? Did you even look up the relevance of Biz Markie?
No.
You got what I need. And that's about as well as he sings. Yeah. Anyway, okay, so we've recapped a little bit of our Olympic fun. You can go back and read about all of this at matttalkonline.com. And then there's the Rio blog section under, aptly titled blog. So, Julia, let's just talk a little bit about your Olympic experience. And things didn't go well for your training partner. But as a training partner, what's it like to go to the freaking Olympics?
It was unreal. I didn't really know what to expect, as weird as that sounds. If it was going to be overwhelming, if it was going to be like a world championship or what. And it was honestly the coolest experience of my life, getting to see that many sports come together. Like you said, I've been to 2 different world championships with Adeline previous to this trip, but that's just wrestling. You get there and you're interacting with all these different athletes and fans from all these different countries. Like just walking down Copacabana Beach, you see an American fan and suddenly you're best friends. And now you're like, oh, where are you going? Where are we going? Like, let's all go there. And just there's a lot of camaraderie and like national pride, regardless of what country you're from. And just being at some of these events. You mentioned Clarissa Chun. Snow kept pulling tickets out of nowhere. We ended up getting to see the women's gymnastics team final, and I'm a huge gymnastics fan. And that was unreal for me. So that was really cool. I'm a huge women's soccer fan. Anyone that knows me knows that I have like a really weird obsession with the U.S. women's national team. So I got to go watch the women's soccer final. Unfortunately, the U.S. didn't make it there. But, yeah, it was just so awesome getting to experience all that. And it's really motivating, too, going forward in 2020, making sure that I'm there as an athlete, too, not just as a training partner this time.
Yeah, what was that? Is that process kind of bittersweet? You don't make the team. You don't have the opportunity to qualify the spot. You were at a different weight class than Adeline, but to sit there and be like, okay, great, the Olympics, I should be here.
Yeah, that was actually really tough for me. I was on the bitter bus definitely the day 69 kilos competed. I really thought I had a shot to make the Olympic team this year, and I ended up losing to Tamira Mensah in the semifinals, who I had beaten the previous 2 times I wrestled her. And then I beat her again about a month later at Canada Cup. So that was really frustrating for me. I don't know if I was in my own head too much or what, but it didn't work out for me. It took me a good minute to get over it. And then, I got over it and I was finally like moving on. And then I went to the Olympics, and then I had to go watch 69 kilos compete. And I had to watch girls that I had beaten win Olympic medals. And it was frustrating, but I remember talking to one of my coaches back home, and he said, you can either be bitter about it or you can let it motivate you and get you ready for this next 4-year quad. And that's kind of how I took it. And I really got the most out of the experience, being in the warm-up room, with Adeline and getting a feel for everything there. And I really think it's beneficial for me moving forward that I got to experience that and get that motivation.
Now, as we circle to the college weights, and you mentioned Tamira Mensah, who was actually recently on Richard Immel's show, Bonus Point. She picked up another championship at the WCWA. And then we've got the championship. So let's focus on King here. You got a fourth championship in a row. You got a number of All-Americans. You've got Women's Wrestling Week on top of that. I mean, let's talk about what it's like to go from being a four-time college All-American to now coaching and being part of the coaching staff that wins another national title. What's that feeling like? What does that how's that change from being an athlete to being a coach?
It was really strange at first. It's kind of funny when I applied for the assistant coaching job. It was about a week before we left for Rio when I decided that I did kind of want to pursue that. I did all of my interviews for the job via Skype from Rio. And then when JM came down to come watch Haley Agello wrestle, that's when he offered me the job, sitting in the stands of the wrestling venue. And I took it right there. So the day I got back from Rio, we had our first team meeting. So I landed at like 10 a.m. At noon, I was sitting in the practice room. Coach Warren was saying, oh, Julie's our assistant coach now. So it was kind of a funny process how that all worked out. And at first, I didn't know how it was going to work. I was teammates with a lot of these girls. I just graduated 2 years ago. So it's kind of hard sometimes saying telling someone to get their ass into gear when there's been times when I've been in the room and, having a bad day. But it's been a really easy transition. The girls really responded to me well. And it's been great. The hardest thing I think for me is not every girl approaches wrestling the same way. Some girls are motivated by different things, and what motivates me might not motivate someone else. And what gets them going, to me, doesn't do a whole lot. As an athlete, I was always able to just kind of focus on myself. You go to a national tournament as an athlete, you're not necessarily thinking about the team score. You're thinking about trying to win your own national title. Now as a coach, you're trying to pay attention to every single different girl and make sure every girl performs to the best of their abilities so that you can win a team title. So it's definitely been a little bit of a mentality change for me, but I think I've made some adjustments, and it was a really great year. Obviously, whatever we did as a coaching staff as a whole worked out. We got our fourth national title.
Yeah, and looking at the team there, three individual national titles, Marina Doi, Brianna Neal, and Haley Agello picking up championships. Three other wrestlers finished second. One of the things that jumps out at me about these individual performances is Marina and her twin sister Regina actually did wrestle in the championship final at 101 pounds. Is that something the WCWA put in, or is that something the two decided to do on their own?
They did not want to wrestle. They wanted to see if they could be co-champs. WCWA, so there's, in the bylaws, they have to wrestle. I don't know if there was like a precedent for it. It's never happened before, but I don't know if there was an actual rule, but they weren't allowed to double forfeit out. So they did have to wrestle. They were okay with it. They knew that was probably going to be the reality. So, they know they had to go out there and scrap, and that's what they did.
Yeah, so what do you do as coaches? Do you just sit in the stands and watch and leave the chairs empty?
We actually did decide to put coaches in their corner. Coach Mormon coached Regina and Travis coached Marina. I mean, it wasn't like over-coaching, but, it's a national tournament. They deserve to have a coach in their corner. They both understood there wasn't any bias or anything, but, just to have someone there for them between periods, they deserve that. And it worked out.
Yeah, so what's that got to be like from a staff to be like, it's not just teammates. These are twin sisters who basically been double champs in everything from the time they were little kids all the way through. So it's got to be a weird. I mean, what was their response to, afterwards on how they had to wrestle each other? I mean, one obviously had to win.
Yeah. They were okay after, they took 30 seconds after the match or whatever it was just to kind of let their emotions out or whatever. And then they hugged it out and everything was fine. For me, the Doys aren't just my athletes, they're my best friends. So it was really hard for me. I did sit in the stands and just kind of watched nervously. But everything is good, their parents are right there and everything was good by the end of the night. Not even the end of the night. I mean, literally like a minute later, everything was hunky dory and, they're awesome girls. They really have a lot of mutual respect for each other, obviously. And they understood that when it's time to compete, it's time to compete. So now everything's happy now though.
Well, let's talk about the vertical with Brianna Neal here.
Yeah. Brie almost made me cry. I'm not a crier at all. The last time I cried actually was Olympic trials. And Brie Neal is one of the hardest working people I've ever met in my life.
You dislocated your elbow in high school. You didn't cry. I saw this happen. Exactly. You're like, oh my gosh! You didn't cry though.
A lot of expletives, but no crying. No.
Yeah,
I'm pretty
15-year-old, lot of expletives. That was real nice, Julia.
I was at least 16 by then.
That makes it a lot better.
I'll blame it on my parents. We'll go with that.
Mary, this is on you.
She'll own it too. She'll be like, "Yep, that's my daughter."
Okay, you're now going back to when you were crying.
Good. Yeah. Like I said, a lot of these girls I was teammates with too. So with Bree, it's not just that I've coached her and seen her work hard. I've been through a lot of grueling practices with her. There's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that have gone into the practice room with Bree there. Bree's been in the national finals 3 times now and has came up short the first. Let me rephrase that. She took second her freshman year, lost to Vicki Anthony. Her sophomore year, she just had a tough semis loss, ended up dropping to 4th place. Last year, lost again in the finals, and this year finally broke through. And there's no one that deserves to win a national title more than Bree. She just works so hard, and this year finally break through and get that national title after always coming up just short was just awesome. Amy Fernside's tough. She's one of the best girls in the country on the senior level, not just in college. And for Bree to get a big win like that in the national finals was awesome. And you could just tell as soon as that last whistle went, Bree just super emotional, just overcome with emotion. And that kind of triggered me a little bit. And I got choked up. I didn't cry, but I got choked up. So that's kind of what led to that leap. When she got that last takedown with about 6 seconds left and sealed it, I just quite literally jumped for joy. That was a really cool moment for me.
Yeah, and it's not like choked up like the ending of All Dogs Go to Heaven, where, anyway, we'll talk about that another time. I think that's well documented that's my tearjerker there. But now we get to Haley, who we mentioned in the Olympics, up from her Olympic weight significantly, 116. At some point, even bumped up even higher and actually took a loss at a higher weight this year, almost like 5 weight classes up or something like that. But, what's it like to watch Haley go out there and just, win her 3rd championship, again, up at 116, which is, again, above her Olympic weight at 48 kilos. I mean, how does that dynamic work from her coming down from to the Olympic weight, then coming back up during the WCWA season?
It was a little bit of transition for her. When she first got back, Haley took some time off after the Olympics, which she deserved, and just kind of got back into wrestling. She did wrestle earlier in the year at 130 as well at the Patriot Duels. So, Haley's so good at wrestling, and a lot of times it doesn't even matter. I think she teched every single person she wrestled this year at 130, except for that match at National Duels, just on technique and finesse and being a great athlete. And 116 was her college weight prior to dropping 48. So I don't think that was too bad of a transition for her. Haley's just strong and so good that she still overwhelms girls. She was a little bit banged up this tournament. She pushed through, got a gritty win in the finals. So we're really proud of her for that. There's a lot of pressure on you when you're going for your 3rd national title, whether you're an Olympian or not. It just shows a lot about Haley's character that she even came back to King. A lot of people would make an Olympic team and stay at the Olympic Training Center or just pursue senior goals. But Haley really is a team-focused girl, and she wanted to do this for the team. And I think that was part of her winning a national title. It wasn't for her so much as it was getting that team title, because that's the kind of character Haley has. And that was pretty cool.
What's the cool thing about seeing where the WCWA has come since you started competing as an athlete? Your freshman year, we're talking about 6 years ago at this point. Now there's, it's not just a true open anymore. There's limits on how many wrestlers can compete. You can carry multiple entries to the tournament, but in some cases only 2 max per weight can score. The depth is improving. It's gone from a 1-day tournament to a 2-day tournament. I mean, what's it like to see the growth of the WCWA?
Oh, it's awesome. Just from a fan perspective, it's so cool to see the growth of women's wrestling firsthand. Like you said, this is my 6th time being at the national tournament. First 4 as an athlete, now 2 as a coach. And the progression is insane. I think my freshman year, we ran the entire tournament on 3 mats in a day. And now 6 years later, we have 6 mats, 2 full days of wrestling from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. matches going on. And quality wrestling, by freshman year, you'd still see a lot of tech falls pretty quickly. The talent was still there then, but there wasn't as much depth. So you'd have the top 4 girls teching everyone else all the way to the finals. Now from the first round, you have girls wrestling tough matches and good technical matches too. We have full 32-man brackets. Before, every team could bring every single girl on their roster and we still only had maybe 16-man brackets. Now there's a 15-athlete cap for every team, and we're having bigger brackets than we ever had before because there's more programs, more athletes, and more girls who are competitive, and that's a really cool progression to watch.
What are some of the challenges you see with the growth? I know you and I have talked offline about, the ability to fill the amount of roster spots, but with rapid growth, what are some things that you feel women's wrestling at the college level has to be aware of? Can you grow too fast in your opinion?
I think so, yeah. Something that I've always kind of said, and it's kind of my unpopular opinion of women's wrestling, is that we need to stop adding so many programs so fast, which no one wants to hear. Don't add programs. That sounds aggressive. But the issue that's kind of happening right now is that there's all these new programs and we can't fill rosters. Right now you have programs that have been around for 5, 6, 7 years that only have 5 girls on their roster. Programs that used to have, 30 girls now have 10. If you actually look at the WCWA stats, like I mentioned before, every team was allowed to bring 15 athletes. Of the 30 teams that entered the tournament, only 2 teams actually brought the full 15 girls. And in a sport where like red shirts and stuff, for us, women's wrestling, red shirts aren't very common. So we have 28 programs who can't bring a full 15 girls to the national championships. And someone said, well, is that because they don't want to or because they can't? And I guess that varies program to program. But for us, between injuries and girls redshirting and stuff, we only had 12 girls to bring. And, we're the 4th time defending national championship team. We had 12 girls. Simon Fraser took second. They're the second best team in WCWA. I think they only brought 10 or 11 girls. So I do think that, it's good that we're adding programs and that schools are interested in adding programs, but I don't know how sustainable it is. Everyone says we need more opportunities, and that's true, but it's a slippery slope a little bit. Right now, girls are expecting to get athletic scholarships. And from a coaching standpoint, this is something I've faced, is that there's girls that we want but we can't afford to get every girl that we want because other schools have more money. We're the national championship team, but a girl who, is looking to pay for college might want to go to, a lower ranked team that can afford to give them a full ride. Which isn't a bad thing by any means. I mean, it's giving girls opportunities, but it's resulting in these smaller rosters. And, this is something that's been a conversation even at the D1 level, is why are there forfeits happening in Division I wrestling in a dual meet? In the Big Ten, why can a team not fill a full 10-man, duel? And this is happening way too often for us too as well. Even national duels, there were teams forfeiting weights, and these are the top 8 teams in the country that can't field a full dual meet lineup. And I think that'll kind of work itself out in the future, but I think there does need to be some focus on the programs that we already have and building those teams rather than adding 10 teams every year and having all these teams that only have 4 or 5 girls on their roster. So I don't think it's a problem yet, but I think if it's not monitored, that could be something later on down the road that is an issue.
So, okay. So just so we're clear, it's adding programs, good. Adding too many too fast, not so much. So say hypothetically, instead of adding 10 a year, let's make sure that we can get these 3-4 schools that are ready, that are going to have athletes. And then the next year, okay, we've got more high school kids wrestling. Another state has added girls wrestling. I mean, we're seeing girls state tournaments pop up. I think Kansas just held their first all girls state tournament. Virginia had 1 or 2 girls tournaments this year. I mean, they're working to get these things sanctioned throughout. And do you think this is a cart leads the horse or the other way around in terms of high school participation and getting the word out for more girls to know that there is college opportunities? Or do you add and then try to fill, or do you fill and then try to add? I mean, what do you think the equilibrium shifts sit at?
It's interesting because right now the girls wrestling participation in high school is higher than it's ever been. If you were solely basing it on what our numbers are, we should be able to fill these rosters. The thing the problem is that it's not happening. If we're just basing it off of, look at Fargo and how many girls are at that national tournament. If even half of those girls chose to go on and wrestle in college, all of these rosters theoretically should be filled, and they're not. So do you try to reach out to the high school programs and pull these girls in, or do you wait until it builds up more and they, hope those girls have more aspirations to go wrestle in college and stick around for 4 years? The other issue kind of that's been happening is last year I kind of ran some stats. I don't know if you saw those on retention in WCWA. And it was some crazy stat where, like, I think among girls who are girls who are an All-American as a freshman. Only 50% of them wrestled all 4 years of college. And so I'm not talking about girls who are walk-ons and then stick around. We're talking about the best girls in the country. They were an All-American as a freshman, and it was just below 50% on girls who stuck out 4 years of wrestling. So that's an issue too. And again, that's not just a trend with one or two programs. It's across the WCWA. So I think there both has to be, some more build-up at the grassroots level, but I do think that colleges need to start working to fill rosters. And that's a really easy thing to say. Well, no duh, we all have to fill rosters. But I think it's both. Work has to be done both by the WCWA and also by the college programs as well to build these state tournaments for girls and give them opportunities at the next level and let them know those opportunities are out there.
What are some things that you feel that these schools that are adding wrestling are doing right? I mean, we've got now 14 years of WCWA competition. We've talked about how it's expanded, how it's now a 2-day tournament. There's depth in these brackets. You're seeing this as a pipeline right to the senior level. And, you're seeing cases where senior level athletes are still actively competing. It's created a true feeder system to the senior level. What are some things you feel that the WCWA has helped with USA Wrestling and vice versa that really show that this is a great time to if you haven't already jumped on the women's wrestling bandwagon, to do so? I mean, we've talked a little bit about some of the things that we got to worry about. What are some things that are just the WCWA and women's wrestling are knocking out of the park right now as from an athlete and coach's perspective?
The WCWA is awesome. For everything I just said, it's actually really great. I think one of the coolest things is that we're really well integrated with the USA Wrestling season, like you kind of said. Most programs are sending girls to the junior national tournament, or like the UWW junior national tournament to make the junior world team. We call it body bar. And our girls are, like, almost everyone that's in that age group is trying to make it with junior world team and go into that tournament. A lot of programs are sending girls to the US Open and the New York AC International, or Bill Farrell as it is now. There's a lot of girls that go to Dave Schultz every year. And there's just so much integration there that you don't see on the men's side. You don't see a lot of those guys doing both the senior level circuit and the college circuit simultaneously. And that's something that we can afford to do because our seasons work out that way. And you kind of mentioned that we have girls that are on the senior national team who are still competing in college. So it builds the depth of WCWA to have that high quality of talent, and also benefits the senior level because we have more quality girls competing there because programs can, kind of foot the bill and send them to these tournaments, which is pretty awesome. There's even been times in the past where for the senior Pan Am team, they've used the college national champions to determine who made that team. So USA Wrestling is also kind of investing in the WCWA as well to build their teams and kind of build the future of the national team as well. The WCWA has also done a really good job recently of building more, just try to how to explain it, but creating more drama for the national tournament. Before, like my freshman year, we would maybe have a couple of duels a year, kind of like tri-meets or whatever. The Missouri Valley Open was a big individual tournament, and then you just kind of go right into national duels and nationals. Now there are like 5 or 6 different open tournaments throughout the year, which are all pretty big. OCU hosted a big individual open this year. Missouri Valley is still a big tournament. The McKendree Bearcat Open was actually a pretty big tournament this year, and I think only their 3rd year of hosting it, which is really cool. And there's also a lot more dual tournaments now. Cumberland has started hosting a dual tournament the past couple of years. It's really grown. And all these tournaments kind of lead up to more drama at our national tournaments. The dual results throughout the year kind of, for example, my first year out of college, we lost to OCU at the OCU duels. It was a tied duel, came down to criteria, and they won. So that year that became, as it turned out, that ended up being the finals of the national duel. You had a duel that early in the year came down to criteria tiebreaker, and now it's a national final, and we ended up winning that. So there was a lot of drama because there's more buildup and there's more events leading up to these tournaments, which is really cool. This year's seeding meeting actually took close to 4 hours, and it's because we actually had all these results to pour through from 10, 12 different tournaments throughout the year, whereas in the past, girls are maybe getting 10, 12 matches before nationals. So that's a really cool thing that's happening, is that we just have more events, more opportunities for girls to compete prior to the national tournaments.
Yeah, one thing I noticed this year, I started tracking dual meet standings as best I could for the WCWA, and with the looks like 32 programs that I was tracking, a couple of them didn't have dual meets based on geography. Some of them opted to go with the NCWA and their folk style side of things. I think Springfield Tech was one of those. But we're looking at the amount of dual meets some of these teams. Like Emmanuel wrestled 24 duels that I could track, and I'm also counting their A team against other schools, B teams, not mixtures of teams. But that's another thing. These dual events is when you have rosters and say, okay, you're talking about not forfeiting weights, but you still get the opportunities in these duels. Okay, we're going to have a B team and sometimes a C team. Like Cumberland's will have 3 teams when they're hosting. OCU will have 2 teams when they're hosting. We've actually got dual meet standings. You guys were the only team that went unbeaten, 11-0 as far as my records go. But Wayland Baptist going 12-1, McHenry going 11-1. These teams are. There's real schedules now too, like you said with the dual meets. So I'm just trying to. It's like, man, I got to keep up with the women just as much as I do. I can get women's results a lot better than I can junior college results. Let me tell you, I'll tell you that for sure.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like you said, we're building actual schedules now. It's not just coaches calling each other 2 weeks out and being like, oh, y'all want to have a duel in a couple weeks? Great, okay. These things are being planned out months in advance, and these events are being scheduled so that there's no conflicts. There's communication happening that's allowing these events to happen. So there's no interference and stuff. And, I could pull up Twitter anytime. I follow all of all of our women's college wrestling programs, like Twitter accounts, or at least their athletic department. And you can find dual results happening almost every day. Every weekend there's something going on. And that's really awesome. Like you mentioned, it's not just schools kind of wrestling in their area. There's a lot of schools in the St. Louis area, but they're not just only wrestling each other. They're coming out here. Simon Fraser traveled from Vancouver all the way to, Williamsburg, Kentucky to wrestle in the Patriot duels. So there's an effort to not just see those same couple teams over and over again, which has happened in the past. We're trying to get out there to wrestle as many teams as we can going into the national tournament, the postseason, so that we can see those other competitions and those other programs.
Shifting gears a little bit, is it the job of every women's wrestler and every women's wrestling coach to be an advocate for women's wrestling, as we've seen USA Wrestling declared February 11th through 19th Women's Wrestling Week, and this is the second or third year they've done that. Sally Robertson and the former Catherine Fulp-Allen, Catherine Shea, are now working on some Wrestle Like a Girl campaigns. I mean, there seems to be a real concerted effort to not just say, okay, the women are here. No, there are real organizations being founded specifically on the backs of women's wrestling. We've seen the videos that Cole Schrupp has put out for Wrestle Like a Girl. I mean, there seems to be a real movement. And it doesn't seem like it's just, it's not pacifying or patronizing the women's wrestlers. There's a real movement here. And you feel it's your job as an athlete and a coach, and Jason Moorman's job as the head coach, as a coach, to be the advocate for women's wrestling? Or how much do you think the women have a vested interest in doing this more so than, say, Coach Moorman, who's a male coaching a women's team?
I think, I wouldn't say it's an obligation, but I do think it is a little bit of our responsibility to put the word about women's wrestling out there. What Sally's doing right now is awesome. I just had a long talk with her when I was out at the training center last week about it. And it's easy to say, oh yeah, women's wrestling is great, grow the sport. And it's another thing to actually do something about that. And that's what Sally's doing. And not all of us have the resources to do that. Right now, Sally just retired from wrestling, and she has a lot of time to put all of her efforts into doing this. You mentioned like someone like Coach Moorman, or even myself, we're trying to coach and build our program right now. We can't take every second of our day promoting women's wrestling, but I'll take every opportunity I can, being on Short Time right now to talk about women's wrestling.
Woohoo!
Whenever, yeah, man, you always got time for Short Time.
Love it.
I had to throw it in there.
Please tell me more about me. No, go ahead.
But you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. It's, it's every opportunity you can. Like, I don't think anyone's obligated to every second of their day be, women's wrestling. Yeah. But you have to take the opportunities that are given to you and, kind of do your part to grow the sport. And that's how we're going to grow. Sitting back and doing nothing isn't going to do anything about it. We have to be proactive and get the word out there and give girls opportunities. That's something that Sally is doing, building camps, and giving girls opportunities, creating scholarship funds. And that's the kind of stuff that's going to put women's wrestling on the map. And that's the kind of thing that's going to bring in maybe non-women's wrestling fans. I think something we've kind of always done in the past is that we're not marketing to everyone else. We're trying to market wrestling people into buying into women's wrestling. And we're kind of at the point where we need to start getting people outside of the wrestling community to buy into women's wrestling. And that's kind of the direction we're trying to move towards, is getting those people that might not know anything about the sport to get involved, getting those girls who need to find a sport where they fit in to get involved in wrestling and know that is an option for them. And And I think we are getting there. It's not necessarily the quickest process in the world, but it's constantly improving. And more girls are joining wrestling every year at the high school and youth level. WCWA is growing, and I think that's proof that those efforts aren't, for nothing. We are progressing.
Going back to the Olympics, and this kind of ties into that, Helen Maroulis, how big was that for you as a women's
huge.
wrestler and for women's wrestling as a whole?
Huge. Domestically, every girl now has that person that they can say, that they saw Helen Maroulis become the first American, Olympic champion. We've had medalists before. We've had girls win championships. We haven't had that one person really come out and establish themselves as, no pun intended, the gold standard. Every girl now saw Helen Maroulis, and not just female wrestlers, young girls around the country all saw Helen Maroulis on TV win an Olympic medal in women's wrestling, an Olympic gold medal in women's wrestling. And that put women's wrestling on the map a little bit in the United States. Internationally, it's just as big. She didn't just win an Olympic championship. She beat the best women's wrestler of all time to do it. And that got everyone's attention. You got on Twitter right after that happened, and news outlets everywhere were, putting Helen Maroulis, defeats the greatest of all time, and that's huge. It was kind of like when Icho lost at Urigan last year. Everyone, it wasn't just big for, one country. It's women's wrestling news as a whole. And that really gets people interested, involved, and emotionally invested. And that's so good for the sport. I think what Helen did really kind of catalyzed something. Girls now see what they have available to them and what they can shoot for. They can be an Olympic champion in women's wrestling. And that was a big moment for wrestling, both American and everywhere else as well.
Yeah, I mean, you say you don't. You got teared when you talked about, Brie winning the championship. I mean, how many women's wrestlers do you think were welling up after what happened? And it wasn't just Helen winning. It was Helen beating Superwoman to do it. I mean, that was
Exactly.
a victory for everybody.
Mm-hmm. I was actually sitting up in the stands when it happened. I was sitting with Haley and Jesse Thoke. And Jesse Thoke, he was tearing up. And he goes, "Man, I swore I'd never let a girl make me cry ever again." Like, something like that. Word for word. That's what he said. And so that's kind of what it is, talking about someone that's also an Olympian and Greco-Roman, but it's not just getting the attention of women's wrestling. It was wrestlers everywhere that welled up. I know my mom said she was welling up. And it's kind of like I said before, it's getting people not just to pay attention, but getting people emotionally invested in women's wrestling and getting them to care. And that's something that's really cool.
All right. We usually talk to Julia on the show about various topics in the world of wrestling outside of the thing is because Julia's bubble of college wrestling doesn't just reside around women's wrestling. Julia's a junkie when it comes to college wrestling. So there's some news that came out as we record this on Monday, February 13th. Julia, I'm just going to throw this out there. What are your thoughts on the national duels?
As a whole, like the whole event?
Well, the D1s, the announcement that
Right.
The pairing. Yeah.
Yeah. I have mixed feelings on it. I think it's cool that they're trying to build something. They're trying to go with that bowl kind of system of like the college football uses, where they build up matchups, and they're trying to make the dual season matter. If you get on Twitter, pretty much any day of the week, wrestling Twitter is freaking out about how duels don't matter. Guys that don't wrestle in duels, or people were being ridiculous after Kyle Snyder didn't wrestle in a duel because he was at Urigan, saying he doesn't care. This is proof that duels don't matter. All that matters is March. So this is a good effort to make duels kind of matter, and make it, to build something up and build up drama for these duels. The other part of it is that we're not really determining anything. And if you go back to the old format where it was actually like a bracket type system, you can kind of build drama a little bit more in a different way. You can build up a semifinal matchup, and you can make a bracket and try to figure out who's going to meet up where and who's going to make the finals. And so I don't know if it's a perfect system. There's flaws with both ways of doing it. And there's benefits to both ways of doing it. So the problem with it right now as it is that you have matchups that you kind of want but aren't going to happen. We kind of had Iowa and Virginia Tech take two this year, and throw out all the orange reference you want. But
I don't think that's good. We'll find out on Coach Dresser's show about that later in the week, but we'll find out if there's any colorful commentary being thrown around.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I will go to on Twitter this morning, is people making all those comments like, "Oh, well, not going to see Virginia Tech and Iowa again." and all that. So I do think it's cool that, they do the Big Ten team and the best non-Big Ten team and match them up. But I don't know if it's a perfect system yet. I think as long as teams have influence on who they will or won't wrestle, there is still kind of a flaw there. So it's cool and I'm excited for it and I'll watch every single one of the duels. But I do think there needs to be a couple of tweaks until it's a perfect, awesome system that's really building duels and making them important and making them matter.
All right, Julia, I've settled on this segment. I'm just going to call it Short Time because it's already on Short Time. For about 2 years, I've been trying to figure out a name for this segment. I'm just going to say it's Short Time on Short Time. 10 questions. You've done this before, but I'm changing up some of the questions for you. And are you ready for the challenge part? I don't know, part 4? I don't know how long I've done this if you've been on the show, but you ready for another batch of Short Time?
This is only the second time I've done it.
3, 2, 1.
Question 1, favorite person to follow on Twitter?
Pat Downey.
End of discussion. Q&A over. All right, question 2, best food you ate in Brazil outside of the steak sandwich?
The last night, Kira Berry took us out to a Brazilian steakhouse after Helen won. That was bomb.
Which they just call in Brazil steakhouses. Question 3, favorite soccer player of all time?
Oh, man. Allie Krieger for the U.S. Women's National Team.
Okay, not going to pretend like I know who that is. Question 4, worst flavor of Gatorade?
Worst or best?
Worst. I've already asked you the best. That was last time.
Oh, I had the purple rain flavor. I forget what it's called, but it's purple. I think it's called rain. I don't know. It's disgusting.
Number 5, your favorite video game of all time?
Grand Theft Auto Vice City.
Oh, good one. Question 6, in the spirit of left shark, right shark, left Mongolian or right Mongolian?
Ooh, right Mongolian, absolutely.
Question 7, what move would you rather have in your arsenal, the John Smith low single or the Jordan Burroughs blast double?
John Smith low single.
Who's one guy or girl from history you'd like to wrestle regardless of weight class?
Carellen.
Why? Okay, never mind. Never mind.
Just wants to know what it's like to just get a royal ass beating. It'd be satisfying in a weird way.
Number 9, funniest teammate.
Like they're on the team or like one of like my old teammates?
Ever.
Nicole Joseph, for sure. The biggest weirdo I know. She's awesome.
And what is your spirit animal?
Ooh, a sloth.
Ooh, yeah, because you said today you were not going to leave the house. So, Julia,
I'm still laying in bed right now.
You are out of the short. Time is up. Short. I don't know. Ooh. Short time on short time. I'm just going to stick with that. Yeah. So anyway, Julia, thanks for coming on the show again. Why don't you just give us a little pitch on what is King University, where you can find it, right on that Virginia-Tennessee line, and what to expect from the Tornado singular in the future.
If you want to follow us on Twitter, it's at KingU Wrestling. We tweet really awesome stuff. And by that, I mean I tweet really awesome stuff. So you should definitely give us a follow. We're on Facebook. If you're in the Tennessee area, come out, watch us wrestle sometime next year. We're 4-time national champions for a reason. We'll put on a show for you. We're going for our 5-peat now. Coach Mormon always says that we're not defending anything. We're always pursuing something. The girls have 2 weeks off, and then we're going to start pursuing our 5th national title. But we still have some work to do this year. We have girls trying to make junior world teams, trying to make senior world teams, trying to make university world teams. So our season's not over. There's work to do. We had girls win national titles this weekend, but Coach Mormon kind of put it perfectly. Until we have 10 national champions at 10 weight classes, there's always improvement. So that's what we're going to try to do. And definitely keep an eye out next year to see what we can pull off.
2018, King tries to win 5 in a row. No team has ever done it. Oklahoma City's won 4. King's now won 4. Julia Salata, thank you. As always, at J Salata, don't ever text you.
Absolutely not. But Twitter, all day.
Yeah, Julia, always a lot of fun to have on the program. Great sense of humor. And you know what? Here's the thing. I went through that whole interview, and we didn't mention Pattaya one time. Although we kind of alluded to a Team Pattaya member, and those of you who don't know what Team Pattaya is, it was the 2012 Junior World Team that competed in Pattaya, Thailand, which was one of the more interesting places. And by interesting, I mean kind of, well, never mind. It was the part of Pattaya we were in was not exactly the most savory. There are other parts of Pattaya that definitely weren't savory as well. There were also some really nice parts that we didn't get a whole lot of opportunities to see. But Julie was on that world team. Pat Downey was on that world team. Jesse Thielke, who was alluded to earlier, was on that world team. Allie Reagan was on that world team. I mean, it was a good group of kids that came through. And the juniors, again, you couldn't be turning 21, so it's 20 and under. And it was a real, just great, dynamic group of kids that was on that trip. And I can say kids because they were significantly younger than I was at that time. Also, we didn't get to bring up bananas at all. And I neglected to bring up Hannah Gricewood's placement at the WCWAs, because usually that leads to Julia talking about bananas and Ashley Iliff. It just basically, there was a giant inside joke, and I blew the opportunity to talk about bananas. The old 80s cartoon Banana Man that was an early 80s. That was a British show. I think it came on with Danger Mouse, which he's the greatest. He's fantastic. He's the greatest superhero of them all. Danger Mouse. I don't know the rest of the words. I can probably Google it or YouTube it if that is a word. So Julie always providing some insight. And again, Karaoke Buddy, we didn't mention that. We didn't find any karaoke places in Rio. So glad to have Julia on, celebrating Women's Wrestling Week here in the United States. That is February, this stretch of February, the 11th through the 19th. We're talking about it. So interesting news in the world of wrestling on February 13th, and it involves the NWCA National Duels Championship Series. And just before I give my take on this, I have to, again, full disclosure, I have been working with the NWCA since 2005. I was full-time, gainfully employed by the NWCA for 3 years, from 2005 to 2008. At the time, I ran the Intermat website. Then I left. Now, I have maintained a good relationship with the NWCA, and my role with them now is a freelance media. I hesitate to use the term director, even though that is on the website. This is a freelance position. I do get a small stipend out of it. However, what that means is also I write many of the press releases, not every press release that comes through, but many of them. So after last year, we had the issue with the national duels and teams not wanting to go where, and there was the controversy, and putting that release together was a bit cumbersome. So this year, I also coordinate the coaches poll, which also came under a little bit of scrutiny last year. And for full disclosure, this year the coaches poll went through a little bit of a transformation, because the rankings were supposed to be one of the factors, one of the guides. And if you saw Cale Sanderson's tweet today, which I'm going to 100% agree with his placement on that. I'll get to that in a little bit. But the coaches poll was, at the time, one voting coach per conference, and then there were two voting coaches in the Big Ten and the EIWA due to the size of those conferences. Now, when conferences then contracted, the Big 12 contracted, that absorbed the Western Wrestling Conference, so that lost another conference. So we're down to a certain number, and it's like, you can't have a poll that's reliant on votes that with that few numbers. So in the verbiage of the National Duels Selection Committee, they have a committee for this. I do not know who's on it. I'm not part of that process, so I cannot tell you what went on in the selection process. What I can tell you is I coordinated the coaches poll. There were two voters per conference, and if there was ever an outlier type of vote where somebody looked to be trying to finagle voting their team higher, that vote would be thrown out, and in its place, the average of the other 15 votes would be put in place. That did not happen at all this year. So the 16 votes come in each week. They get released on Tuesday morning as part of the coaches poll. So this year, like last year was a little different because I took my wife to an AC/DC concert on Valentine's Day, which was freaking awesome. But you knew that because AC/DC is awesome. So this Sunday, I'm trying to be more prepared. So I leave the Minnesota-Ohio State duel. I finish up the interviews, which I recently released on theguillotine.com. Go to theguillotine.com/GG26 if you want to listen to the latest episode of the Guillotine Grapevine. That's really irrelevant. I'm tangentially thinking outside of my own brain here. Okay, so the poll, we get the ballot out. Now, we're trying to get this thing out on Sunday night. Well, time starts rolling. It's late. You know what? They just table it, because the key was making sure the poll was finished. Poll got finished. Then the poll didn't get released, but the poll was finished. The poll was completely done and finished. Then the pairings were released on Monday morning at around 8 o'clock Central Time. So once those pairings were released, I had a couple things I had to tweak. I had the initial TV time wrong, and I initially had Edinburgh's ranking wrong. Edinburgh, for the record, is ranked 23rd in my initial release of this for the NWCA, again, which I was writing the press releases. I incorrectly had listed them as 24th. I just looked at a different line. So when you go through long press releases, finishing them at 2, 3 in the morning, waiting for release, that was just it was a little rough. So, but this isn't about me. This isn't about woe was JB on the National Duels thing. So, that being said, my opinion on the matter is not determined by the fact that I work for this organization. And, Pat, Tassi, and Mike Moyer are aware of that, I have my own thoughts. I basically kind of keep things in regards to the NWCA kind of, outside. I don't really talk about their initiatives a whole lot, just because I don't want to make it look like there's a conflict of interest there. I mean, wrestling's a tight-knit group. So there's certain things where, people will be working with people that they cover, and it sometimes creates some ethical dilemmas. Now, this is my opinion on the matter. I had, no input in the selection process. The only thing I did is make sure I tracked every single result this year and made sure all the voting coaches got it. So that was a component of the dual meet selection. So I guess in a way, my research and statistics were part of the process. I myself, my opinion did not matter. My input did not matter. Just making sure that everybody had the statistical information they needed about the dual meet records, the conference standings, which again, MattTalkOnline.com is the only place in the country you're going to find Division I conference standings. Okay, it's the second place. Track Wrestling has them too, but they're using them from me. So they even give me a credit there. So now that I've told you all of that stuff, I've told you all of that stuff to tell you this. Just basically, it's like the longest disclaimer ever. And as I'm going to pull up Cale Sanderson's Twitter right here, at Cale Sanderson, because this is going to be the guide. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't always agreed with the stance that some of our sports people have taken with Penn State, Iowa, and Oklahoma State. Those are the three programs that draw fans. And it does seem at times that those coaches do get the benefit of the doubt or advantages because they do have the crowds that draw. Well, they draw. It's simple. It's simple finances. If you're going to have Iowa come to your place, you're going to draw a big crowd. You're going to have Penn State come to your place, you're going to draw a big crowd. You're going to have Oklahoma State come in, you're going to draw a big crowd. There are teams that do draw big, but usually when you look at the team across the mat, it's going to be Iowa, it's going to be Penn State, and it's going to be Oklahoma State. And all three of those coaching staffs and programs have had issues with the format of the National Duels in its various formats. I've said the word format several times. I know Oklahoma State had an issue with the National Duels being in Iowa. They would have to always go to Iowa to wrestle Iowa in addition to seeing them in a dual meet. So they could go to Iowa twice in a year, and they could look at it that way. Then they changed the format and moved it out of Northern Iowa. Again, I believe that was an issue with the facility. So a lot of people that are wondering why we couldn't just have it at UNI, it became not possible. And I believe that had to do more with facilities than it had to do with timing, because the non-Division I portion of the National Duels has pretty much stayed in its exact same form. It just moved to Springfield, Illinois. D1 also worked on the NCAA thing, as we know, to work through getting a dual meet component, and this is where all of the dual meet mumbo jumbo and the coaches started bickering. And Cale didn't like the format of the Final Four qualifying. The 1 year it was in Stillwater, you had the regionals, the 4 teams. He didn't like that format, so Penn State didn't compete. Now then, Cale had written a blog on his website that kind of teased this bowl series idea a couple years ago before it actually come out. And this format that we're in our second year is essentially based on some of his idea. Now, the implementation, and this is where I'll get to Cale, this is not what he envisioned in the implementation. Now, I'm not speaking for him. This is my assumption of what I think he was trying to get to. So last year, the point was kicking this thing off. The top 8 Big Ten teams would host the top 8 non-Big Ten teams. We had a kerfuffle with Virginia Tech and NC State. Virginia Tech had beaten Iowa State during the year pretty handily, and then they were beaten by Iowa State at the Virginia Duels with the Walking Wounded. But hey, you know what? You lose, you lose. Duke basketball, they lose with Christian Laettner and Bobby Hurley. Yes, I'm throwing an old reference out, because, if those guys don't play, they still lose. Guess what? Duke, you still drop in the rankings, to use a basketball reference. Or if you're starting quarterbacks out, yeah, you still drop in the rankings even if you lose. So So we get there, and Virginia Tech then they win the ACC. So with loose bids in place, it's like, well, ACC champ, North Carolina State and Virginia Tech were neck and neck in the polls. I can't remember exactly how it figured out last year, but anyway, Virginia Tech wanted to wrestle Iowa. I think everybody knows why. There's that history there. We'll get to that in a second, but that was okay. There was an issue that, okay, maybe last year, okay, NC State had the better season. Yes, they didn't win the conference, but if they're going to look at the rankings the way it is, and that's where I kind of got a little annoyed last year, where some people were saying that the rankings were being messed with to make matches happen the way they did. I can tell you that did not happen, because I was the only one who knew the voters last year. And when I submitted that poll, it was of the highest integrity. Nobody changed any votes. Mike Moyer didn't even know the voters last year. So to avoid that, this year, we go back to my rankings discussion. 16 voters chosen by the conferences themselves. Now, if there comes a time that these 16 votes from this last poll need to be made public, they can. That was in I believe, the bylaws of this selection committee that says, hey, okay, if there's a question about the votes, they can be made public. They will be made public. I don't think the poll means anything right now to make those votes public. If they want to be public, yeah, I can make them public. That's not a big deal. So with the poll not being an issue this year, now we get back into the matchups. So the idea behind it, after the controversy last year, was to create, we get the ranking, we got the auto bids, we got, I'm not familiar with what teams had the contracts either. I know that Mike Moyer told me yesterday that Missouri was the only team out of the MAC that had a contract. Now, if they won the MAC, they would have hosted, because they would have been a top 10. Well, not because they're top 10. They would have been a highly ranked non-Big Ten team that was a conference champion. They also signed a contract. To my knowledge, Northern Iowa did not sign a contract. I do understand there was a discussion about having them host. As Mike said in the press release, and that's basically the only way I could word it, is unforeseen circumstances. They opted not to compete. So the MAC is out. That sucks. So now we're looking at the ideal matchups. And I'm looking at this on paper and knowing, okay, here are the teams we got involved. And this is exactly the tweet Cale sent out today. And I've already mentioned John Smith not liking the scenario when it was Nationals in Iowa. Cale not liking the scenario. And the jury's out on whether or not you believe Tom Brands likes or dislikes this format. Because last year, there definitely was an argument for Virginia Tech to wrestle at Iowa. There was also an argument for NC State to wrestle at Iowa. Ultimately, NC State went to Iowa. Virginia Tech went to Michigan. They both won. Penn State beat Oklahoma State and sold out Rec Hall. Had a big duel there. I remember I was in Miami watching it. So, have I lost anybody yet? Now, back to Coach Brands in Iowa. So, I can't speak for anybody on that committee on what concessions. I know that everything that was in the press release was what Mike told me. So, I'm still left here with my own theories. And again, it definitely looks suspect that Iowa's not wrestling Virginia Tech. They're going to Edinburgh. Okay. The argument maybe, okay, Saturday duel. So I do think now we've got Oklahoma State's had an issue with it. Penn State's had an issue with it. And now, by the looks of it, Iowa has an issue with it. So Cale's tweet, Oklahoma State, Penn State, we have that. Then in rank order, they would go the next highest Big Ten team is Iowa, ranked third. They would host the next non-Big Ten team, which should be Virginia Tech. Then Ohio State, NC State, Nebraska, Cornell, Rutgers, Lehigh, Michigan, South Dakota State, Indiana, Appalachian State, Purdue, Edinburgh. Now, in a perfect world, the Pac-12 would be involved. In a perfect world, the MAC would be involved. So there are some extra teams here. Now, also, it should be noted that Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota opted out of the national duels this year. I assume, and again, I'm assuming this, I assume because of the coaching situation at Minnesota, even though the schedule was sitting there floating around, that was probably a good enough reason for the Gophers not to compete. I'm going to give them a pass there. Illinois, I have zero information on why they did not compete. They have been a competitor in this duels before. Now we've also got Wisconsin. And I would say on paper, Wisconsin did not look like they were supposed to have that strong of a team this year. So I can understand in the preseason why Wisconsin would have opted out. And of course, we know the issues with Minnesota. So what about these matchups do I disagree with? Everything but the first one. But that's, I I think you come out and you want to have it straight down the line. That's what we should have. And I don't want to really dig up skeletons again, but the Virginia Tech Iowa thing from the late Jim Weaver era and the transfers and the guys that didn't get their release. Okay, it's done. We're long gone now. That's a while ago. I mean, Virginia Tech was horrible shortly thereafter. They have since resurrected their program, taken it to heights it's never seen before. Iowa hasn't missed a beat. So time to let that go. Let's just let it go, Let it go. Let it go. I'm singing Frozen here, probably because I've got young kids. Let it go. Virginia Tech versus Iowa. Even with that history, you got an Iowa alum coaching one team. You got, bad blood administratively. You got fan bases. One's growing. One is always polarizing. This would be amazing for the sport of wrestling if these two teams would hook up. Now, I'm going to talk to Kevin Dresser on my Virginia Tech show. I'm going to go a lot more in detail. Actually, Coach Dresser is going to go more in detail in that show. And I'll be honest with you, too. That is a situation where, as the host of that show, and Virginia Tech does pay me for that show, they are a client of the Matt Talk Podcast Network, that show is going to have a decidedly Virginia Tech spin because that is what I'm hired to do in that respect. Ultimately, the point is, Coach Sanderson and his pairing that he posted on Twitter should be what the matchups are. That's what it should be. It's that simple. And like I said, Kale and I don't always agree on dual meet stuff. Matter of fact, we've had some offline, I wouldn't call them arguments. We've had some offline disagreements in regards to how dual meets should matter or how they should be tied in. I mean, we have philosophically some different views on that. So I'm not taking Kale's side on this national duels thing. I'm not taking Kevin Dresser's side on this national duels thing. I'm not taking Tom Brand's side. Actually, more appropriately, I'm not against Tom Brand's position here. And when it comes to John Smith, I mean, John's not really been that vocal about it other than the whole Iowa thing a couple years ago. So I want it clear. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone saying, oh, it's your fault this doesn't work, or it's your fault this doesn't work. It's been everybody's fault that it hasn't worked, first of all. But hey, you don't, and I just have to say this, if you don't want to compete, then don't sign the contract. If you're not willing to accept the draw, you should have never signed the contract to start with. That goes for every team. It's not, I'm not just pointing a finger at Iowa. I'm not just pointing a finger at whoever doesn't want to see whoever. Now, the only difference is if there's repeat matchups, and that was part of the deal. Avoiding matchups that have already happened. But it was too perfect. That outline with the teams that were actually competing, once the teams were set, what was wrong with that? Nothing. Except for the Iowa-Virginia Tech thing. I don't want to belabor that point because, again, I understand what each coach, I may not fully grasp it because I'm not around those programs every single day. I can totally understand why those moves would be preferred by those staffs, why matchups wanted to be made, why a team wants to bring this team in because it's going to be huge for their program to get that type of gate or the history there. Who doesn't want to bring Iowa or Penn State into their place? It's because they are the iconic Iowa, Penn State, Oklahoma State are the iconic programs right now in college wrestling. Yes, there are other teams that have won national title. I mean, even Ohio State is starting to reach that point. They've got a national title in the last couple of years. Ohio State will draw a big crowd. Long story short, I'm just kind of rambling here because I love the dual meet. Do I think it should be part of the championship series? No. Do I think we should crown a dual meet national champion? Yes. Do I think the NCAA should crown a dual meet national champion? Yes. Do I think it should be what crowns the dual meet champion instead of the NCAAs? I don't know. I waffle on that because and this is a whole nother tangent I'm not going to go down. That's for another show. But these should have been the matchups. And that's all I'm saying. Again, I'm not trying to throw my colleagues at the NWCA under the bus because there's a lot of moving parts to it. Just my opinion as a wrestling fan, as a broadcaster, as a journalist, as a PR guy, as a hired gun to host shows for programs, or as generally as a person people come to look to for information and knowledge and statistical whatever. I just think that going 1 through 8 would have been the best way. It would have stuck to the plan. It would have stayed consistent. It would have made sure that all that work that now this is where I'm going to turn this around on me just for a little bit here. It would have made sure every single score and all the work I did all year for this top 25 poll to make sure the integrity of the poll, that it was out, that was checked, that everybody had everything they needed, because it was important that this poll was going to be part of the process. Well, a little annoyed, but I know people work tirelessly on this. I wanted to see better matchups. I think a lot of us did. So that being said, that's I didn't expect to go this long. I have no script. I'm just kind of shooting from the hip. If I did make sense, I didn't make sense. That's cool. Whatever. I just think the matchups, I'm going to agree with the matchups in Coach Sanderson's situation. I'm not necessarily going to agree with the big three, big four, if you include Tom Ryan, big five, you include Rob Cole. Not going to necessarily blindly agree with anybody's stance here, because I disagree with little bits and pieces of everybody's, and I agree with every little bits and pieces of everybody's. So I'm not exactly on the inside, but that's just my take. Like to thank you for spending your time listening to this. Sometimes, I don't know, it could be a pointless rant. You might get something out of it. I just wanted to speak a little bit. So that being said, I think I've said that a couple times too. Thanks to Julia Salata for coming on the show. Thank you for subscribing. Leave a rating and review if you like what you hear from the Matt Talk Podcast Network, 19 shows on this network, and you want to contribute. MattTalkOnline.com/join the team. William Smith, thank you for your contribution. You are a contributor to this program. I thank you. You recently joined the team at MattTalkOnline.com/join the team. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Proud to have you on board, and like to thank you for spending your time with me, because even when I go on a long rant that may or may not have a point, it's time well spent. So I thank you for spending your time with me, because you've always got time for short time, even if it's for a long-winded... Anyway, yeah, that's it. Mic drop.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.